Swag out them boss.
Driven by Webster Style, the man, the voice of fragrance. Please excuse the Christmas tree back there. Don't judge me. I'm here with my good friend. Man, it's been known Conor a long time. It was great to meet him a couple years ago. Man, almost a decade ago at Baltimore Comic Con. But he's a creator who I have come to call friend. Who I've always been a supporter of from the Kill Shakespeare days. I loved what him and Anthony did with that, and it really made me fall in love. Not just with Shakespeare, but comics again. That's I never not fell in love with comics, but that book got me on this new love and passion of comics, especially for independent. So I'm very happy to sit down and talk to my friend Conor McCreery. Conor, how are you doing, sir?
I mean, I'm just looking at everything that is in front of me, and it's just motivating me just to some simple words such as I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. It's so great to see you, man. It's been a long while. I remember you were one of the first people to kind of get on Kill Shakespeare and to be someone who was kind of outside of that like really insular Shakespearean world, and that's it was one of those things that made us realize, okay, like this book can, it can cross over. It can go to all sorts of people. And, it doesn't have to just be kind of like stuffy, Shakespearean scholars saying, come hither, Titus kind of thing. And so, yeah, no, it is. It's been like 12 years. We've chatted about a lot of different things. And so, yes. I'm thanks for taking the time and giving me another chance to chat comics with you. Because clearly looking at me, it's not the style.
Well, I'm dressed down today. I had a rare day off, so I took myself to the movies earlier, so I'm just kind of relaxing.
What'd you see?
I saw the new Naked Gun movie.
Oh, how is it?
I thought it was hilarious. I laughed pretty much the whole way through. It was fun, but it's a Naked Gun, so I expected it to be stupid funny, and it was, and it's kind of cool seeing Liam Neeson since he's been this like middle-aged action hero for the past couple years. Even that was like a send up on stuff that he's done. So it was really fun. It was a great fun film. I definitely think it's one of those things that if you go to the theater and see it, you won't be disappointed because you're gonna laugh all the way throughout with the references, the stupid jokes, the sight gags. It's like you know what you're going for. If you're going to see a Naked Gun movie, you've seen the original two. Is exactly what you think is going to be. So
I've seen a lot of good reviews for it. It's funny. A couple of things I was reading were saying that a younger generation, like it took them like 5 or 10 minutes to kind of figure out that style of humor. Because of course, you and I being of a certain vintage, we take that kind of Zucker Brothers type of humor as like, oh yeah, Top Gun or like Top Secret or Hot Shots or all these Airplane, like all these movies that either kind of just before us, but we watched as little kids or came out when we were younger. And so, yeah, that kind of weird, super like Mel Brooksy type of over the top, humor. And so, yeah, there's a bunch of people saying, oh yeah, they're in the crowd. And like, you could tell who the younger audience members were because it was about, 5 or 10 minutes before they were like, oh, okay, so this is supposed to be stupid. Oh, okay. Like what, like what the hell is going on? I don't understand. Like, why is it so weird? Yeah. And so, there's a part of me that's like, oh, that'd be super cool if this generation who has been exposed to this humor is like, oh, this is great. Because not only, does it bring all these other great movies back into the limelight, which is wonderful. As someone who loves comedy, it would be nice to see comedy getting a shot again. Because, it's one of those things like, you keep hearing about, the death of comedy. It's even on streaming, it's hard to find. So I would love to see another renaissance in comedy. And yeah, it's funny how they used our man Liam Neeson in a similar way to Leslie Nielsen, just another guy that nobody thought was a comedic actor, which is weird to me because obviously as a kid, I just knew Leslie Nielsen from The Naked Gun. I didn't know he was this hard-boiled detective type that was super serious.
Right. Yeah. No, I didn't think about it until you just said it. Like they don't make movies like that anymore in that vein. If it is a comedy, it's more of the screwball stuff, not so much all the jokes and the puns and the sight gags. Like they don't make movies like that anymore, really. And it's funny because and we'll get to The Last Witch. I talked to my offspring about it, and and she was just like, "Oh, I wanted to see that," and I was like, "One, it was rated R." I'm like, "I'm not sure if I want to take you to see it," but after seeing it, I'm like, "I think you like a lot of the sight gags." But I said there are definitely things you won't get. Like definitely so many things like you just won't get being the age that you are, outside of the sort of sexual innuendo, but also they're just references and things that are way beyond her years. So they talk about that younger generation. I'm curious to see what younger people really take away from this movie and what they get and what they don't get.
I mean, I they had me with the whole Karis one drop in the trailer, and I was like, all right, I was like, okay, because that was actually, that's weirdly enough became a family song because it came on sometime when we only had 2 kids, and I think my daughter was like 5 and my son was 3, and of course the whoop whoop. I mean, that's just like a fun sound for kids to make. And so that became this sort of family song. And so now that they're a little older, now we can talk about the context behind that song. Right. But yeah, no, so I'm very excited to see that as well. But yes, I know we're not here to give the Naked Gun more free publicity, although I'm excited to talk about the Naked Gun because I love love the franchise as a kid.
Definitely. So it's been a minute, but we are now approaching The Last Witch issue 2. For those that, and I think we talked before on the first issue, but for those who haven't seen that or don't know anything about The Last Witch, tell us about The Last Witch.
100%, sure. So The Last Witch was my version of something like The Secret of Nim or The Dark Crystal or like the original Brothers Grimm type fairy tales. The type of fairy tale story that doesn't necessarily end all right. Like these type of stories that were for kids that are a little intense. They're scary. Like I remember, watching The Secret of Nim and there's this terrifying house cat who's trying to kill the main character, Miss Brisby, who's this mouse who's just trying to keep her family alive. And there's this terrifying owl and the Dark Crystal, the sketchy scared the heck out of me. Like I remember going into a movie theater when I was a kid and I can't remember what I actually saw. But the Dark Crystal trailer came on before, and I convinced myself that I'd actually gone into the Dark Crystal screening because it was showing at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I had a low-key panic attack because I was like, oh my God, I'm not ready for this, right? And I was probably 9 or 10 or whatever. I'm sure my mom was like, what are you doing? But so the Last Witch is meant to be in that kind of vein. It is an all-ages adventure. It's about a 12-year-old girl named Saoirse who lives in medieval Ireland, who finds out that she can use magic. The problem is she finds that out because a coven of witches destroys her village, leaving only her bratty little brother, and her cigar-smoking grandmother to fight this coven and to keep them from opening this door that has to remain closed, or it'll be the end of not just Ireland, but the world. And so there's a bit of like Avatar, The Last Airbender to it, in that Saoirse has to kind of gain these elemental magics in order to fight the witches. I like to call it, Irish Avatar with just the right amount of child cannibalism. Because early in the story, and you don't really see, one of the things I want to do this book is I did want to make it kind of intense. I wanted it to be a book that, readers, my kids probably started reading it at 7 and 9, which was, maybe aggressive, but, somewhere between 7 to 14 is probably your target audience, but honestly, it's anybody who likes a good fantasy adventure story. And so I tried to balance making something that would have some intensity to it. There are some pretty frightening looking witches, but at the same token would never push the envelope too far that a younger reader would be like, oh man, I can't handle this. But I did want to push the envelope. So yeah, so it really is an adventure story, and there's a bit of a Breaking Bad element to it, weirdly enough, because the idea that I created for the world was that the reason there is magic in medieval Ireland is because if you know anything about Irish mythology, which many people don't, the Irish kind of believe that there was this fairy world, Tir na Nog, which is kind of almost underneath Ireland. And so this is where this door that I talk about, this door is to there. And there's a creature behind that door that could cause, untold damage to the world. But the door isn't quite fully sealed. And so that magic that used to go freely between the two worlds, it's why there were leprechauns in Ireland. It's why there were fairies and things like that. the magic is still leaking into our world. And so certain people, like our main character, Saoirse, this 12-year-old girl who has a strange birthmark, well, it's a witch mark. It shows that she is the type of person who can actually access this magic. But the problem with the magic is it's not for like you and I, it's not for humans. And so every time Saoirse uses the magic, every time she gains one of the other witches' powers, she masters another elemental magic, she is getting closer to stopping this coven and their queen, the colic. But she's also getting closer to losing what makes her her and to become one of them, maybe even the last witch. And so there is this underlying story of this idea of, if you've always wanted to be special, because Saoirse starts the story as a character who is an outcast. Her grandmother is considered this very strange lady who lives in the woods, and she makes potions and they seem to work. So people, they'll go and see her, but as soon as they're done with their business, they're like, yeah, she's crazy. Right. So Saoirse has always wanted to be special. And now she finally can show everybody that she is. But it's that question of, if you've always wanted to be special and now you are, would you actually be able to hear when the people closest to you are saying, hey, Alden, like, the thing that's making you special is also destroying you? Right. Or would you care? Would you just want to be special? And so that's kind of the underpinning. So the first book of the series, which came out back in 2020, 2021, is 5 issues, collected as a trade, which, I highly recommend if you're listening to this podcast. That's where you should start. Get that book. It's available in any comic book store. You can order it online. That book took us through the first couple of battles that Saoirse had with the witches. It introduced her to another member of kind of their fellowship, this half fairy boy named Hugh. And then it kind of ended with Saoirse making a controversial choice. And you leave book 1 realizing that Saoirse may have less control over herself than you thought. Mm-hmm. And where we start with book 2. So issue 1 came out a month ago. Issue 2 just came out the other day. It was just this past Wednesday on the 31st of August or 31st of July, or 30th of July. The first issue of book 2 kind of starts with, we slow down. Saoirse is trying to master the magic. She's feeling really on edge. And then she ends up getting involved with her and her brother and Hugh playing this childhood game that their father taught them. Their father, he was one of the people who died at the very beginning of the book in this kind of attack on the village. And so it's this sort of bittersweet moment that allows her to reconnect with her brother. And then the ball gets overhit. She maybe uses magic a little bit, trying to win. And when Brom, her little brother, goes chasing after it, he finds something frightening in the woods. And it forces Saoirse to reassess everything she thinks she knows about magic and whether she's on the right path or not. And so that's how book 2 starts. But ultimately, book 2 will take us on the journey where we will find out whether Saoirse can defeat this coven of witches. Can she keep this door closed, or will she actually ultimately become a tool of the Queen of the Witches and hasten the end of the world kind of thing?
Got you. No wonder I enjoyed it so much when I read the first book, because, you talk about your inspirations, and Dark Crystal is always one of my favorite movies ever. Especially that fantasy vein, and Jim Henson was a genius. Anyway, but you bring it up, and I'm going to get to a bit more of the inspiration, but I want to ask you to talk about the inspiration. So, especially like those sort of fantasy films for us as children and growing up, what has been the reception to The Last Witch from your audience at home?
I mean, so my kids, it's been really fun. I was kind of reading them the script. So they've been kind of in this world for a long time. Mm-hmm. I get suggestions. It's funny. When I'm working on ideas, my kids give me lots of suggestions. I've been working on this science fiction idea off and on. And now my kids have just told me, like, it has to have monkeys in tuxedos. And I'm like, we're in space. Like, what are you talking about? It's just like Lord of the Flies in space. What do you mean monkeys in tuxedos? But they're like, no, it's got to have monkeys in tuxedos, Dad. And I figured out a way. So I'm like, oh, you know what? I actually know how we can get monkeys in tuxedos.
I mean, that just sounds like a cool idea anyway.
I mean, but no, this one, they haven't given me too many notes, except there's a thing that happens in book 2. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember The Princess Bride, where, the grandfather is reading the story to Fred Savage, and well, something happens to the Princess Bride. I won't spoil it. And Fred Savage, as a kid, is like, no, Grandpa, like, you got that wrong. Like, that's not what happened. And the grandfather's like, well, that's what's written here. And like Fred Savage gets quite upset because what's happened in the story is not what he thinks should happen, right? And it's not just a wish fulfillment thing. It's a fundamental, like, that's not what happens to the hero. The hero wins all the time. And so there's a moment in the second book of The Last Witch where when my kids got to it, they were like, no, Dad, that's not how that goes. You have to change that. Like, that's not all right. And I was like, well, that's what happens. And they're like, no, like, Dad, no, that doesn't happen. Like, you're not allowed to have that happen. And they got like pretty upset. And I kind of had to tell them, you know what, like, you'll have to wait to see what happens next to see whether this seems as bad right now to you as it does. But not every story can be happy all the time. You know, that's, I was watching a TikTok the other day. Or sorry, it wasn't a TikTok because I'm not on TikTok. I was watching YouTube, and somebody was going through about how, kids who are sort of people who are like sort of 35 or older were just repeatedly traumatized by the childhood literature that they were given. You know, Where the Redford Glows, Old Yeller, Bridge to Terabithia, like all these books where it's like, nowadays, you're a kid and you get this book that's about like a happy goat who learns, like, which is great, who learns about why his differences don't matter, and or like why it's great that everybody's different. He's like, yeah, that's all great. He's like, but I was reading books where the best friend dies in a freak flood, and the other kid just has like, we went through battle scars. We were like Vietnam vets surviving the ideas thrown at us by the storytellers. And I do think there's something to that. I do think there's a weird resilience that you can gain from reading stories that sometimes go to places that, are not always happy. And I do think in a weird way, it gives you some armor for life to be, it's emotional practice for dealing with tough situations, which, of course, happen in life.
Yes. No, I would agree. I think that it's interesting watching the things that my daughter's growing up with compared to what I grew up with. And, we mentioned The Dark Crystal, even though it has a happy ending, it's a dark movie. I don't know about you. I absolutely loved The Black Cauldron when it came out back in 85, and that was a very grim and dark movie. A lot of the things that we were exposed to as kids and were in movies, I look back now and thinking, oh my God, they actually did that in a kid's movie. I do agree that it does give you some armor, but it also gives you more of a realization that not everything is a happy ending when it comes to life. And you will have to, get over a hurdle in many respects. Because I'm saying bad things are going to happen. There are going to be trials and tribulations. And now a lot of the things that I see, it's all happy and fun and no real strife and no real lessons learned. Again, not saying everything, but a lot of the media that is produced for that target audience, it's very happy and bubbly, and you don't have that aspect of darkness that we had growing up.
And I think, like, there is that element in terms of what you just talked about, the idea of, like, the trials and tribulations, which I think it's not bad to be able to see it as something that you can kind of model in life. It's not like because you read about Old Yeller and, the sad ending for a dog, that means when something bad happens in your life that you're 100% ready for it. But I do think it gives you a bit of training, but also from just the context of a story. Like, as a storyteller, I think when when you put the characters through a ringer, when you put an audience into a space where they have to go through the valleys of a story where things are not looking good, where quote unquote bad things happen, I do think it makes the ending, because I to be clear on The Last Witch at the end of the day, it is a story I was writing when my kids were like 6 and 4. It was something that I knew was going to come out by the time they were going to be like 7 and 9. I wanted it to be something that was going to be accessible for them. So at the end of the day, despite all this talk of like, oh, it's like Brothers Grimm, it's still a fairy tale, right? It still ends in a way where mostly the heroes prevail.
Right.
I do think that taking your heroes on a journey where they lose some things. And this is very much like an Irish mythology thing. Like in Irish mythology, like every victory is a Pyrrhic victory. There's always something the hero loses. There's always, it's always only a partial victory.
Right.
And I do, and I think like just from a storytelling perspective, that makes stories often, it makes them better because you go through these moments where you think it's all is lost. Like the never ending stories. I mean, on one hand, I love it. And on the other hand, I'm like, it's not really the greatest stories,
Right.
But there are those moments like when, Atreyu, when he's in the swamp and the
Yes.
horse is in the swamp and
Yes.
you're like, right. Like as a kid, like I remember watching that and being choked up. I watched that with my kids not too long ago and they were like the whole, and so it means that later in the story, the victory feels so much more,
Yes,
not only a hard won, but it feels sweeter because
Yes.
you've gone through something. And I get it. Like, I don't want my kids to have to go through never ending series of, like, as parents, you want your kids' lives to be easy, but you don't want it to be too easy because it doesn't give them the chance to face a challenge, to overcome, to gain confidence, to learn something about themselves. And, that's not what a story doesn't do those things, but I do think it is a proxy. I think that's why we tell stories. It is a proxy for us to figure out how life works. So yeah,
Right.
if you're a parent and you want your kids to read something that's really adventurous, that is something that you would probably really enjoy reading to them, that is going to at times get a little scary, at times is going to be a little like, is this going to end up okay? But at the end of the day, it's going to be funny, very funny at times. It's going to have characters your kids are really going to enjoy. And it is ultimately going to end in a place where you're like, okay, the heroes triumphed. And they didn't just triumph over the external forces, but they triumphed over their internal issues. Then, yeah, I mean, I think The Last Witch, I'm biased, but I think The Last Witch does a really good job of that. But yeah, I think it's good. I think it's good to be challenged in your books.
Okay. So I agree. I was thinking just this sort of, stereotypical hero's journey is always that hurdle that in many respects, loss that the hero experiences. And you're right, it does make that victory that much sweeter. It makes it feel earned in many respects. So with The Last Witch, so am I correct to assume this chapter is going to be 5 individual issues as well?
Yeah. It's going to come out basically over 6.5 months, I think. The whole thing is done. It's all drawn. It's all finished. There'll be no delays because there was a bit of a gap between book 1 and book 2. But yes, it'll be 5 issues. They're going to be oversized. So some of them are going to be like 40 pages. Some of them will be more like mid-30s. But I think they're only like $6.99. So it's going to be a pretty good bang for your buck. You're all going to get twice as much of a comic for like less than twice the price.
Right. Okay. So essentially book 1, you're working, this is book 2. How many books do you see for the series in total?
So when I originally wrote it, book 1 and book 2 were actually envisioned as one big story.
Okay.
And so for a bunch of different reasons that ended up changing into like a one book, and then it was single issues. So the second book brings an end to the story.
Okay.
We find out if the door is opened. We find out how how she's going to be able to cope with this magic or not. But I guess it's like anything, right? It's a little bit like, well, what is the reception, right? Like the first book had a great reception in comic shops because of COVID, but because of COVID, it really struggled in bookstores. That was a different kind of world for bookstores. Comic shops, because they had community in a different way, ended up, tons of people, you probably remember, you're buying tons of comics, right? Like, what else am I going to do, right?
Exactly.
Where bookstores didn't necessarily have the same ability to leverage things, at a comic shop, your local shop, it's not like everybody else who shops there, but you feel some level of community there. So, I mean, I know for sure that going into my local comic shop, you'd have your mask on, there'd be 2 people in the store at a time. And I was like, I feel like we're all going to be on the same page here. We're like, like the bookstore downtown. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to run into there. So we'll see. I know what I would want to do with the next story. There are some unresolved threads from the end of book 2, including one like semi-big cliffhanger, but not the kind of cliffhanger that makes the story unsatisfying, but makes you hopefully be like, whoa, wait, so what's going to happen next?
Right.
But yeah, so I know what I'd want to do with the next book, how I'd want to use Saoirse, how I want to play some of the relationships. But at this point with Boom, we're just going to see, okay, it has been a few years since the first book came out. Can we recapture that momentum? And if that's the case, then I'm ready to tell more stories. But if not, if this is all there is, at least for this, at this point, I think it's still a very satisfying book. My dream was always kind of that it would be one of these books that, 15 years from now, two kids who would be, in their mid-20s would like be on a date and talking about things. And one of them would be like, oh, like when I was a kid, I read this crazy book called The Last Witch. Like it really like threw me. It was one of my favorite books. And the other person would be like, wait, what? You read The Last Witch too? Like I don't know a lot of people who know this book, like, and that this would be this like thing that people would have as a connection.
Right.
I will also take a multi-million bestseller, but if I can't have that, I'll take the story that brings people together.
Having mind share that brings people together is definitely, it's interesting, especially being a smaller creator. You never know who really watches your stuff and who it impacts. So when you hear someone or someone talks about, oh, I saw this, or oh, I really appreciated this, and like, oh, like you're just so appreciative. The fact that something you did impacted somebody. So yeah, I would take that over, being this humongous channel with thousands and thousands and millions of subscribers in a day. So I definitely understand, having your book be meaningful to someone and they continue to talk about it and share is sometimes much more important than being a million seller. So I get that. Now, don't get me wrong. We all want that, but
I mean, the trick is to be able to do both, right?
Yes.
The trick is to be able to do something that has that, where people are still listening to what you have to say, like, especially with what you dealt in, like that idea of people being like, oh, what you say strikes me in a way that nothing else on the internet does. Mm-hmm. And then it's just, but yeah, of course, if that circle, and sometimes, for a project, for a channel, you're like, oh yeah, there is a natural choke point for how far it can go, because it's, it's niche, or you're talking about things in a way that a lot of people want to slide above and they don't want to engage with. But sometimes you never know, right? Like it's funny when all of a sudden out of nowhere stuff just like, Kill Shakespeare was a bit like that. It started off okay, and then it just kept finding a new audience. In fact, we actually have just re-released the first two books with Gemstone. Okay. And Anthony actually wrote a whole new adventure that came out a few months ago. And we're finding this whole new generation of students, actors, older comic readers who are like, oh yeah, I remember hearing about that Kill Shakespeare thing, but I never ever picked it up. Who are picking it up and reaching out to us and being like, right. Oh wow, this is so cool. Like, how did I miss this the first time, kind of thing. And so yeah, you never know when something's going to find a new audience, I guess.
Right. Exactly. Now, speaking of finding new audience, where can people find more about The Last Witch and actually buy The Last Witch?
So, book one, which is called Fear and Fire, that is like a full graphic novel thing. So that's something, it's in print. Your local comic shop, if they don't have it on the shelves, they can definitely order it for you. A good independent bookstore. Also, obviously available online as well. Book two, which is Blood and Betrayal. The first two issues of that are out now, so those will also be at comic shops. The next one will come out at the beginning of September, I think, if I remember correctly. And so, yeah, you can grab that there. The website, I'm still kind of living on the Kill Shakespeare website, so that's a great place if you ever wanted to email me. But if you're looking more specifically for updates on The Last Witch, I'm chatting about it. I'm on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, so that's just Conor McCreery. I'm The Real Conor on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. I have a Blue Sky account that I'm not using a lot yet. But yeah, those are a lot of places. I'm starting to do some videos now where I talk about the writing process and use some of my books as an example for, what I think good writing is, why the choices I make. One is all about why I'm a thief, and I'm an unrepentant thief, and I love to steal ideas. But that's only because Pablo Picasso said that good artists borrow, but great artists steal. And so if you want to know more about that quote, swing on over to one of my channels and you can see me talking about why originality is highly overrated and intellectual property theft is all the rage for writers. I say that mostly tongue-in-cheek,
Right.
but only mostly tongue-in-cheek.
All right. All right, Connor, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. You guys should have seen everything flash below as we were talking. If you missed it, rewind, watch it again. That'd be great for the views. But also everything's going to be down in the link below as far as how to interact with Connor and more importantly, find out more about The Last Witch and also purchase. Connor, thank you very much for your time, man. I appreciate it. You guys out there, thank you again for your time. Thank you for your listening ear. Remember, stay safe out there and be blessed. We'll catch you next time.
Swag out them boss. Look.